This morning we're traveling once again with Jesus, this time on the road from Jericho to Jerusalem. He has gained a significant following, all convinced that they have found someone that will make things better. The disciples are more worried about who will be on the left and right hand of Jesus, or how one might keep their wealth and get into the kingdom of heaven, or which commandments someone may use to get into the kingdom ahead of them, or when it is about who is in or who is out when it comes to doing Christ's work. That's a quick one-sentence synopsis of the last 4 weeks' worth of gospel readings. For context, this week is about the last trip Jesus and his followers will take together. The road to Jerusalem is the road to betrayal and death on a cross. And on the way, we encounter Bartimaeus. We learn that he is a blind beggar, but Mark tells us nothing of his backstory. Mark does share with us his name, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, and nothing else. To be so specific about this introduction, we're left wondering if those first reading the gospel would immediately know who he was and what it was that caused his blindness. But is he really an historical person? The name Bartimaeus, by some accounts, is a compound name from the Greek Timaeus, meaning honorable, and the Semitic prefix bar, meaning son of. The blending of Semitic and Greek may indicate that there is something more about this encounter, that this is more allegory than history. Even though the healing of a blind person on Jesus' trip from Jericho is mentioned in 2 other gospel narratives. So why the mashup of an event that likely happened, the healing of a blind man, and some allegorical message meant to make us think more about those who we may walk with on this path to Jerusalem? Of course, I would argue that the entire Bible is allegory, but that may get me into more trouble and is much more complicated to unpack than we have time for this morning. But let's run with the idea that Mark is presenting us with an allegory this morning. What is Mark trying to teach us about this perhaps semi-fictional story of blindness, people trying to prevent Bartimaeus from being healed, and Christ's response to being called out as Messiah? Biblical blindness has a wide range of meanings, from weakness or imperfection to punishment for some sin, or, as it may be here, just a setup to teach us a valuable lesson. We may be puzzled by this story because it is apparent that Bartimaeus truly knows that Jesus is Messiah, since he called him the Son of David. This phrase is used throughout the Bible when referring to the coming of a Messiah, and is easily recognizable to those who are around him and to those who are hearing this message today. And Bartimaeus desires healing. When ordered to be quiet, he cried out even more loudly. This is not a man to be put off. And after being healed, Bartimaeus followed Jesus on the journey to Jerusalem and the cross. But maybe, just maybe, this passage isn't about Bartimaeus at all. And certainly by 10 chapters into Mark's narrative, as we would be 10 chapters into any book, we can agree that we are convinced that Jesus is Messiah. But maybe it's not about either of these things, but rather the blindness of Jesus' followers. And let's face it, the sons of Zebedee probably don't want any other competition for those choice seats to the left and to the right of Christ. One aspect may be that followers of Jesus prevent the suffering faithful from accessing Jesus and the healing that comes from encountering the Messiah on whatever road we travel. Let's face it, in 2,000 years of church history, we've often gotten it wrong. While the conversion of Constantine in the early 4th century paved the way for acceptance of Christianity in Europe, it also paved the way for missionaries to travel around the globe and force conversion on indigenous peoples as Europe colonized the globe. Crusades were initiated to take back Holy Lands, whatever that meant. And the idea of just war entered church doctrine and continues to be debated to this day. When the concentration has been more about building large, impressive Gothic cathedrals and not about building community, when the concentration has been more about excluding those who don't meet some ill-conceived idea of what it means to be worthy of God's love, rather than the inclusion that we meet in loving thy neighbor. When the church vision turns to heating the building on Sunday mornings and not inviting people in from the cold during the rest of the week. When we hang on to past glories and don't look to the future of the church, realizing that the world has changed. I'm not saying this change is for the better or for the worse at this point in time. I am saying that change is inevitable. This can be seen in the short 329-year history of Anglicanism in Pennsylvania. From the founding of Christ Church, Philadelphia, when 39 Philadelphians petitioned Charles II to send clergy to build the first Anglican church in the colony, to the closings of St. Mary's, Reading, and Calvary Church, Tamaqua, at our convention 2 weekends ago. From being one statewide diocese to 5 and now to 4, with the reunification of the Diocese of Bethlehem in central Pennsylvania. We adapt to survive, and survive we will, especially when we have the mission of Christ in our hearts, and when we allow people like Bartimaeus access to the Messiah and not to block them out. The cathedral has changed as well. Talk to the history group, and they will tell you about how this parish started with a few faithful meeting in someone's parlor, to being a small church. For those who don't know, the original footprint of the church is basically from this rood screen to the double pillars. This was the front entrance of the church, and the altar was beneath those windows. We now stand as this cathedral, an outpost of Christianity at 3rd and Wyandotte. We've adapted to be able to serve every ministry we've started or joined. Seeing a need, we mobilize to begin ministry. It is through seeing and doing that we break down the barriers to accessing Christ's healing love. As a shameless plug, I'll mention again sheltering ministry we are part of. Parishioners of the cathedral saw a need to shelter the most vulnerable during a particularly cold winter. I fully acknowledge that this ministry predates my arrival here. This ministry is driven by you. I just try not to get in the way and help where I can. Not long ago, the Reverend Sturgis felt the call to minister to the students on the campus of Lehigh University. That grew from a couple of students to a couple of more, and has resulted in a presence on the campus and students joining us on Sunday worship. Lessons learned can help other parishes or even the reunified diocese to coordinate ministries on campuses across our region that now include the Penn State main campus, where we can learn from them. And seeing need is what drew so many to see the value of reunification of the diocese. Bethlehem, the East, has a growing Latinx ministry that the people of this community started, and that the people of central Pennsylvania, the West, see as a need within their own communities. The western part of what will be one diocese has a school to raise up lay licensed and ordained ministers to serve in communities struggling for leadership. The East has been active in matters of racial reconciliation, while the West has the state capitol a 9-minute walk from St. Stephen's Cathedral, where maybe, just maybe, the voice of the Episcopal Church can be heard to instigate a change. And don't forget the initiative of the West in medical debt forgiveness. People who find themselves buried in debt because of illness or injury so deep that without any help, they may never be able to unburden themselves. And I haven't even mentioned ministries of prisons, food pantries, sheltering, LGBTQIA+, thrift stores, children and youth, environmental issues, migration, gun violence, and even international partnerships through the New Hope campaign. that we will all share. There are many things that we can do as a cathedral or as a reinvigorated new diocese, or both. Institutions of not just pretty buildings, but spaces where we just allow people access to the healing touch of Christ. Who knows what that may be? This cathedral sits on land once inhabited by the Lenni Lenape, sometimes referred to as the Delaware. The Susquehanna River, which runs through the large part of the reunified diocese, was occupied the Susquehannock first encountered by Captain John Smith of Jamestown fame or notoriety. We don't learn about these people as they have disappeared. They disappeared by 1763 due to European diseases and war with neighboring tribes. We are blessed by the presence of the Lenni Lenape in this part of Pennsylvania and parts of New Jersey. Who knows what lies ahead for reconciliation between the church and the world that immediately surrounds us. But there may be another interpretation of the allegory we faced with this morning. Maybe, just maybe, this is about our own exhaustion at working in a world that keeps placing people like Bartimaeus on our path. I know from my own experience, it seems that we house one person and then two more show up to take their place. I suspect that if you talk to anyone involved in ministry and service to the most vulnerable among us, that they would have similar stories to share. The work we do does not end with us. The work we do is just a step on the path to the kingdom of God. Jesus was the one that Bartimaeus sought out. It wasn't the ones that were following Jesus on the road to Jerusalem. It isn't by us that the sick, hungry, unhoused, or any of the other Matthew 25 people are yearning to be touched and healed. It is by Jesus, the Messiah. We're just fellow travelers on that journey. And when we're tired, exhausted, suffering from the struggles that everyday life places in front of us, when political ads, news headlines, talk show hosts overwhelm us, when our own health or the health of a loved one seems too much to bear, remember that Jesus is Messiah and that we are on that same journey. I don't want this to sound like pop theology. Don't hear me and think that I'm saying just smile and pray, that God will make it all better, or that God won't give you more than you can handle. I want you to realize that none of us are alone in this struggle. We all encounter the rough patches on the road to salvation, and sometimes we're walking side by side on that road and may not even realize it. It's okay to reach out and touch each other, to lean on each other, to lean into the road ahead of us. When someone cries out for the Messiah, the Son of David, let's not silence that person. When it is us doing the crying, just shout it out. Let's lift everyone crying out up and carry each other to the risen Christ. Let us open our eyes, open our hearts to see where people are and how we might be part of giving them hope or where they're at in their own journey. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Amen.